2019, 3 years before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. President Putin was then shunned by the West, but now America and Russia will renew diplomatic contact.
Today, we're looking at a significant development on the global stage. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's recent visit to Saudi Arabia for high-stakes negotiations. This meeting marks a pivotal moment in international relations, especially concerning the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Let's break down the events leading up to this meeting, the discussions that took place, and the potential implications for the future.
President Trump has just spoken with Russian President Putin, and some details come directly from the president. He has just put out on his Truth Social, and so it's everywhere now, that they discussed Ukraine, the Middle East, energy, artificial intelligence, and the dollar.
Our story begins on February 12, 2025, when President Donald Trump and President Vladimir Putin held a phone conversation. This call set the stage for renewed diplomatic efforts between the U.S. and Russia. Following this, on February 15th, Secretary Rubio and Minister Lavrov engaged in a phone call to discuss the possibility of face-to-face negotiations. The decision was made to hold these talks in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, a neutral ground conducive to open dialogue.
We had a great call, and it lasted for a long time, over an hour this morning.
Trump described his call with Putin as lengthy and highly productive, and thanked Putin for his time and effort, emphasizing their shared desire to halt the fighting without saying a word that it was Russia which sent troops into Ukraine. And while Europe has demanded to be part of any talks about the Ukrainian settlement, Trump and his team have shown little interest in bringing the allies on board. Hegseth insisted that NATO should play no role in any future military mission to police the peace in Ukraine, and that any peacekeeping troops should not be covered by the part of NATO's founding treaty that obliges all allies to come to the aid of any member under attack. For Russia, the fact that for now it looks like it's going to be Russia and the United States outlining the scheme for cessation of hostilities and potential resolution of the conflict, or turning it into a frozen conflict, will be happening between Moscow and Washington, and Kiev and the European capitals will be a sideshow here, said Alexander Gabuev, director of Carnegie Russian Eurasia Center.
So let us stick to these values, let us not reinvent them, but focus on strengthening their consistent application. Let me conclude, and this becomes difficult.
Many in Europe seem flabbergasted by Washington's drastic policy change. It's certainly an innovative approach to a negotiation to make very major concessions even before they have started, former Swedish Prime Minister Carl Bildt, who co-chairs the European Council on Foreign Relations, said on social platform X. Putin, in turn, has been praising Trump even before the call, echoing his repeated claim that he would have prevented the hostilities in Ukraine had he been in office. Putin also has endorsed Trump's refusal to accept his defeat in the 2020 election. Trump said his campaign motto of common sense was cited by Putin in the conversation, adding that we both believe very strongly in it. He said that they agreed to work together very closely, including visiting each other's nations, and added that they would probably meet in Saudi Arabia in the near future. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly why both the parties recently visited Saudi Arabia to meet and have an even deeper conversation.
But think of it, a modestly successful comedian. President Zelensky talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that basically couldn't be won, that never had to start and never would have started if I was president, not even a chance. And it didn't start for 4 years, never would have started. But a war that he, without the U.S. and Trump, will never be able to settle. They'll never settle that war without our involvement. That's why they did such a great job this weekend. That's why Saudi Arabia did such a great job this weekend.
Fast forward to February 18th, delegations from both nations arrived in Riyadh. The primary agenda: addressing the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and exploring avenues to restore and enhance U.S.-Russia relations. Notably, Ukrainian representatives were absent from these initial discussions, a point that has raised concerns internationally. During the talks, both parties expressed a mutual commitment to resolving the Ukraine crisis. Secretary Rubio emphasized the importance of building trust and maintaining open channels of communication. Minister Lavrov echoed these sentiments, highlighting Russia's readiness to engage in constructive dialogue. However, the exclusion of Ukraine from these talks has been a contentious issue. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has firmly stated that any negotiations about Ukraine's future must include Ukrainian representatives. European governments have also echoed this sentiment, emphasizing the necessity of involving all stakeholders directly affected by the conflict.
Everybody there to get to the right outcome, solution-based. We discussed it afterwards. We couldn't have imagined a better result after this session. It was very, very solid.
In a statement following Tuesday's meeting, State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce said Rubio and Lavrov had agreed to lay the groundwork for future cooperation on matters of mutual geopolitical interest and historic economic and investment opportunities which will emerge from a successful end to the conflict in Ukraine. Bruce also noted that the U.S. and Russia would appoint high-level teams to begin working on a path to ending the conflict in Ukraine as soon as possible in a way that is enduring, sustainable, and acceptable to all sides. The U.S. team also includes National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and notably White House Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. Witkoff met with Russian officials in Moscow as recently as last week to negotiate a prisoner exchange that freed American schoolteacher Mark Fogel. Exiting the talks, Kremlin advisor Yuri Ushakov was upbeat in noting the conversation had gone on for 4.5 hours. It was a very serious discussion on all questions that we wanted to touch on, said Ushakov, adding that both sides agreed better relations were in the interests of both Washington and Moscow. But what's more interesting is the fact that these talks make no sense to the general public. Kiev has not been invited to talks between the U.S. and Russia aimed at ending the war in Ukraine, a senior Ukrainian government source has told the BBC. The U.S. Special Envoy to Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, had said Kiev would be involved in this week's talks in Saudi Arabia, but the source said no delegation would be present. European leaders have also not been asked to join the discussions and are due to meet instead on Monday in Paris at a summit hastily arranged by the French president. As fears grow, the continent is being locked out of negotiations. The separate meetings follow a turbulent week where Washington has signaled a drastic change in its approach to the war in Ukraine.
I have the power to end this war, and I think it's going very well. But today I heard, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
In a surprising turn, President Trump, during his speech in Miami, referred to President Zelensky as a dictator without elections and suggested that Ukraine bears responsibility for the war. These remarks have sparked widespread debate and have been met with criticism from various international leaders.
Top EU leaders welcome the agreement on a 16th package of sanctions against Russia. The package will be formally approved by EU foreign ministers on Monday on the 3rd anniversary of Russia's attack.
On the economic front, the European Union has imposed new sanctions targeting Russia's shadow oil fleet, aiming to maintain pressure on Moscow amidst these diplomatic developments. European Union countries on Wednesday, February 19th, agreed to a new round of sanctions on Russia. This time, a strict ban has been imposed on imports of Russian aluminum. According to sources, this sanction will be fully implemented from Monday, the 24th of February. Apart from focusing on Russia's profitable aluminum industry, the new restrictions aim to target the elusive shadow fleet used to bypass the limitations on Russian oil exports by blacklisting an additional 73 outdated ships. Furthermore, the EU will remove another 13 Russian banks from the international SWIFT payment system, alongside prohibiting 8 more Russian media platforms from broadcasting in Europe.
A lifeline to hold on to from the perspective of Europe, from the perspective of Ukraine, to see this is continuously the key US policy that guarantees independence from the aggression of Russia. The trouble with that is that it's one man against many other words coming from the US administration that sometimes raise serious doubts about the intentions coming from the top of the White House.
How did we even get here, Wojtek, that suddenly with, all these talks that happened in these last few days, Munich Security Conference, Paris, Saudi Arabia, how did we even get here if we even look at, Trump's comments that he took to social media, essentially blaming Ukraine for everything and blaming Russia for absolutely nothing?
As these events unfold, the global community watches closely. The outcomes of these negotiations could reshape alliances, impact global markets, and redefine the geopolitical landscape. The inclusion of all relevant parties, especially Ukraine, remains a critical factor in achieving a sustainable and just resolution to the conflict. People all around the world are scared for their lives as they witness these twists and turns. All sorts of comments and tweets have sprung up, but guess which one went the most viral? The realest comment so far was a simple question, a question that shook many people to their core. "We're going to have World War III, right?" exclaimed one person on Twitter. But the main question is, what potential outcomes could one expect from these US-Russia talks in Saudi Arabia? Well, simply put, several scenarios could unfold. Optimistically, these talks might lead to a ceasefire and a framework for peace that includes Ukraine. Conversely, if Ukraine remains excluded, any agreements reached may lack legitimacy and could exacerbate tensions. The role of other global players, such as China and the EU, will also influence the trajectory of these negotiations. But let's not jump to conclusions yet. Who knows what the future holds for us? Let's sit back and witness these events unfold one after another. What do you think? Let us know in the comments below. And with that, we conclude this video. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to subscribe for more updates on the latest in global economics and politics. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you can be notified every time we post a new video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.